Hello, welcome everybody to Vision Untethered podcast, conversations with inspirational visionary leaders. Too often, business owners find themselves tethered to and held back by their businesses. The business, as a result, is essentially held back because it can't operate independently of the founder. We authentically unpack together the biggest learnings, insights in both business and in life, and identify the saboteurs that keep many business owners tied down. Today's guest is Joe Rizzi, founder and CEO of Second Home Vacation Rentals. Joe combines his passion for real estate and hospitality to create unforgettable experiences for guests while maximizing profitability for property owners. Joe's company connects luxury vacation home owners with travelers seeking unique stays. Joe, thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to have you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me, Jill.
Yeah, of course. I'm excited to know first your passion or purpose. What led you and brought you to business ownership and specifically in this industry?
Yeah, it's kind of a circuitous path. I was a financial services corporate employee for like a little over 15 years, primarily in corporate development and investment banking. And I met a lot of entrepreneurs through that job and just advising entrepreneurs and just kind of realized like this is something that I regret not trying but had the self-awareness to realize like probably not a guy that can start a business. I'm more of a guy that goes from 1 to 2 rather than 0 to 1, and found a kind of niche in entrepreneurship called entrepreneurship through acquisition that played to my skill set. So started looking for
Great.
businesses and kind of came across an industry that I was thinking about like I would like for something to be growing over the next 10 years, kind of early in the Corlata Perez framework. So like kind of second stage before institutional investors are in, so I can add
Mm,
some value. And my big investment thesis is really just about like decoupling risk and uncertainty. When you get into these early stage companies, it's kind of like a tweener between like private equity and venture capital. There's a lot of soft skills that are needed in addition to technical skills. And so finding those right people, finding the processes, defining those processes, best
mhm,
practices reduces what the institutional investors see as uncertainty and
mhm.
actually transfers that into risk, which is something that they value. So that's kind of how I got into it and why I was excited to get into this industry.
Yeah,
So yeah, that's kind of the quick and dirty.
love that. I love that financial background and risk assessment understanding that you had, how vital that is. And I think unrealized, in so many business entrepreneurs by acquisition that they don't, without that guidance and expertise, so many acquisitions go wrong because of that lack of understanding. So, in your experience, I'm curious, what were some of the key signs in some of your acquisitions, and especially so vacation home rentals, second vacation home, is that was by an acquisition, correct?
Yeah, so we acquired this business in October of 2021 from a lady, very, very bright, but was looking to just kind of retire. And I
Hmm.
also think that she kind of taken the business as far as she could. And also during that time, you had the halcyon days of vacation rentals at that point. So valuations were probably at the highest that you could possibly get at that point, just because a
Hmm.
lot of people were working from home. It was unclear of like what corporations were going to require from their employee base. So and you also didn't have a lot of travel options. You couldn't travel outside of the United States at that point as easily. So it was a great time to be a property manager, especially in vacation rentals. But
Hmm.
we acquired that business in October of 2021. And some of the things that I was looking for, I mean, like I had to kiss a lot of frogs to go through this, and especially before I even landed on the vacation rental property management space. And I think it boiled down to just like momentum is key with these smaller deals, but also dealing with someone that is either reasonable or has like shared expectations or has clearly identified what their expectations are of the sell side process. And we felt like this seller was just very honest and willing to kind of work with us as we go through this messy process of buying out a small business. I also felt like there was an asset base that we could see that we could add some value to. There was some technology, policies, and procedures that needed to be kind of updated that were going to bring value to the homeowners, insurance like products that could be offered.
Mm,
And so that was kind of the thesis of why we landed on this entity. So yeah.
okay. What were some of those key signs in that process for you that that business would be successful just based on the owner and the previous owner? Were they
Yeah, so
tethered? What was the business's ability and what you saw in that value? What were some of those pointing factors or signs that this would be a good investment?
I think a few things that I was looking at was like cost acquisition versus lifetime value was pretty attractive. I'm looking at like a customer, you have two customers. You have your guests, which is a little bit more transactional, and then you have your homeowners. And the homeowners are the ones with the asset. If we don't have the homes, we don't have a product. So looking at the homeowners, I was kind of thinking through, like if I were a homeowner and I was going to be using a property management service and I was remote, like you've kind of already made that decision when you bought that house.
Mm,
And you
yeah.
you kind of are in a pretty strong relationship at that point. The switching costs become pretty high. And you'll have competitors come in and out, whether they're large or small, offering pretty attractive marketing or unsustainable pricing metrics. And we've had some homeowners leave to kind of jump through that, but we have found that most of them kind of do a soft pushback on like, hey, would you take us back? So I'm proud to say that like, I think the seller did a nice job of building a very reputable brand.
Hmm.
B, we did a nice job of like marking a a valuable service fairly. And I think we do a good job of just trying to give homeowners a sense of like we care. We're not subbing this out to a million different subcontractors, and there's diffused responsibility. So I liked that sense of control because at the end of the day, this is a service business. And
Hmm.
it's not going to be growing like exponentially. At best, it might be growing like super linearly, but it's a linear growth business. And so being able to maintain that like level of excellence in service was really important. And kind of to
Mm,
wrap that up, like I kind of think about like going back to like I know I mentioned like, hey, what would I be looking for like in 10 years of a business, the growth aspect and kind of where it is on that like adoption curve. But I kind of would invert that and say, like, what in 10 years won't change? And I think some of those things are like high quality, reasonable price, and like excellent service or like expectations of those three sort of criterias
yeah.
being codified and marketed out to homeowners. So that way they have an understanding of what we're providing. We might not be a fit, but at least you can make an informed decision of like, this doesn't seem like the right fit for us, or you know what, I'm all in. Let's move forward.
Mm,
So
yeah.
that was some of the areas that I was really interested in. Concerns are always going to be like it's a B2C business. So, you're dealing with something that like is you've got a pro and a con of you don't have customer concentration, but at the same time, you don't have the same sort of like go-to person of like, hey, I can go to this account exec and they represent like, 13% of my business, and that's the one person I go to. You're going to like 10 or 15 people that represent, the same equivalence of the top line revenue of the business. So
Yeah.
it becomes just a different challenge to try to manage. And that was something
Mm,
that I don't think I had necessarily a skill or a background in, but it was something I went in with eyes wide open of knowing like this is a different business model than what I have been accustomed to.
hmm. Makes sense. Yeah. So, what is one mistake, I guess, or learning opportunity, reframe as a leader that taught you a valuable lesson when it came to having vision as well as execution?
Oh, so many to choose from.
Right?
That's the wonderful thing of like small business ownership is that you can make mistakes as long as they don't kill you. And so like I kind of put them into like 5-figure, 6-figure mistakes and stuff like that. You try to
Mm,
limit as many of those as you can. One
hmm.
that I think that I'm always going to struggle with just because like small business or even just leadership in general, there's so much of the subconscious that comes out in your leadership style. Either, yeah, I would just say subconsciously, there are things that come out during a leadership style. And like one of the things that I think I made a mistake on was just being too involved in the day-to-day business for the first like couple years. I mean, I was
Mm-hmm.
working like 14-hour days, 6 days a week with an, kind of an optional floater on Sundays where I'd be working either a half day or maybe not working at all. And I think I gained a lot of insights. I think I gained a lot of understanding of how the business works. But I do think that it started to get to a point near the 2-year mark where I could see myself micromanaging. And that's not a
Mm-hmm.
great quality to have. I need to be able to trust my team to be able to execute and hold themselves accountable based
Yeah.
on the vision. And I luckily had a child at that point, which forced me
Mm.
to, reprioritize my time. And I was obviously not surprised, but pleasantly discovered just how well things could be running without a lot of my involvement, which freed up my time to kind of focus on, the vision.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's tough to do that. Like I'm not an entrepreneur by my career. Like if I'm just looking at like I've been in this for 3 years, I've been on my own for six, and I've been, a corporate employee for like 15 plus years. I'm kind of new to a lot of these like EOS or like entrepreneurial terms. And so like visionary versus integrator, all these terms were kind of new to me. And I maybe
Mm-hmm.
had like an a priori, but I wouldn't say that it was like well defined. So like I kind of went in when I heard visionary, kind of I would say defensively, which I don't think was a little bit going into a second error that I made, which was I think
Yeah.
I kind of distanced myself from having clear responsibilities of who is the integrator, who's going to be the visionary, because I felt like it was a little bit like limitless credulity being assigned to that term. It's just like, oh, a visionary, they just get to work with on whatever they want. And that's not the case. I think I've refined that, reframed it as I've gone through my struggles in the business and my
Mm-hmm.
wins. And that's helped me kind of understand that like the vision versus the integrator kind of balance of like where versus how. And to kind of
Mm.
peel that onion back a little bit more, like the feedback loops on visionary versus an integrator are very different. One's
Yeah.
longer, one's a little bit shorter. So there's this immediacy that can be sometimes conflated with urgency. And
Mm.
if you're in the day-to-day business all the time, it's really
Right.
difficult to take a different vantage and say, like, I understand this is urgent, but it's not important. And being able to be able to say that with confidence, you need to be able to kind of untether yourself
Yep.
from the day to day. Not saying that you can't just step in sometimes in the day to day, but I do think
Right.
you do need to have some distance. Otherwise, you're doing your team a disservice of how to get to where when you're only
Yeah.
focusing on the how.
Yep. Absolutely. I'm often reminded, we stay true to the why and the what, but if we remain flexible with the how, then it allows that foundation, it allows that opportunity for there to be flexibility and accountability and ownership of just how things are executed. Doesn't need to be just one way, right? There's so many perspectives and there's an iterative flow, and strategies change, the market shifts. If we're not, adaptive and innovative and flexible with how we get there, then it can often pigeonhole us, and definitely from a leadership standpoint create this dynamic that doesn't allow that ownership and that contribution from others to be, to be in the roles where they shine and get out of their way. So that's a vital point for sure.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I think that's very
Yeah.
well said.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, yours too. Can you share a personal story of yours of when you've felt held back by your own business and what steps you took to start untethering yourself from it?
Yeah, so I Like I mentioned, I've been an outsider in, I would say, most of my career, and this is no different. So I'm kind of comfortable, and I almost wear it on my sleeve a little bit of like, I'm an outsider. I don't have the pedigree for the career that I had in investment banking. I didn't go to like the most top-notch schools and stuff like that, but I did have success as an investment banker. So I was always kind of like viewed, I believe, internally in the organizations as this like, what do we do with this guy? Where does he kind of fit? And the same thing
Hmm.
happens like when you're taking over a business where you have no background in it. I don't even own a home. I'm real estate free. So
Mm.
like it's kind of a weird sell when you're like, I'm going to take care of your properties when I don't even have my own. But I think what I've learned is that an outside opinion can breathe new life into a business and offer new solutions that are either more efficient or more valued by your customer base. So that's one thing that I've kind of learned. And I apologize. Could you repeat the question? Just so I had a point, but I got a little bit lost
Oh
in my
yeah, that's
thought.
okay. Just where you yourself have identified steps you needed to take to start untethering yourself, to start breaking free of where you were being held back. Any
So
steps you took?
yeah, back to the outsider. I mean, like
Hmm.
it's hard to tell if you as an individual are recreating the wheel or you're creating a novel process. And what I felt like was as I had a really dynamic network of corporate professionals, really sharp people, but they're kind of risk off. And so I needed to
Hmm.
be aligned with people that were maybe a little bit more risk on. And what I found was like, joining a group like Entrepreneurs Organization or like YPO or any of those sort of like pure advisory groups was really helpful to give some guidance on, when am I being too conservative? When am I being too, biased or strong-willed? And just
Hmm.
kind of letting them share their mistakes so I'm not recreating like a level one mistake. I want to be recreating maybe a level 10 mistake or a level 8 mistake where there's enough upside where I'm like, it's worth to do that. But I found I couldn't get out of my own way sometimes and just wanting to be in the business to allow myself then the freedom to explore novel like solutions of like costs are increasing. How do we make sure that we don't pass that on to our homeowners or that they share in a portion of it and make sure that, they understand why there's a cost sharing that's going on and
Mm.
be able to understand that I think there's a lot of confusion, including myself, of like if you're not working hard, I think like Jodie Foster said this, like if you don't feel like you're working hard on your job, like that, you're not doing a good job. And I think what I've learned is like those can be two separate things. Like if you really enjoy something, you might be working around the clock, but it doesn't feel like it's hard work. But if you're doing something that you're not specifically like interested in or have a background in, even doing an hour or 2 hours of it is just going to feel like it sucks all your energy out of you. And
Mm.
so I found myself getting into positions that I already had staff or team members qualified for. And I just needed to be like, look, they're going to make mistakes just like I do. And, I'm going to have to hold these people responsible. And most of the time, they're
Yeah.
probably going to do a better job than I would.
Mm.
So that was really important for me to understand of like when to listen, when to lead. And yeah, just relying on a team. It was something that I felt like I hadn't really done in my corporate experience as much as I probably should have.
Mm. Absolutely. Yeah. Good lessons. So how does being overly tethered to a business affect its long-term value? I think especially with your experience specific to acquisitions and understanding business value, where the risks are. Can you help guests understand this? I think a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners don't understand or fully comprehend the how much of the business's enterprise value depends upon that owner, right? How
Yeah.
much is dependent upon them, what structurally, from a structural capital standpoint, is operating efficiently within the business that doesn't take a complete overhaul and so much investment to run the business without them. Can you help explain that and maybe what you would advise to any entrepreneur is looking to fully understand, not only understand the value of their business, but in what at what point, they need to start thinking about that to ever exit or retire or have some sort of succession plan to be less involved in the day to day.
Yeah. So a few things that I heard that resonated with my some of my experiences. Like one, key man risk is something that does not get a premium.
Mm,
Obviously, like if I
hmm
were to sell you a business, or if you're looking to buy a business, you had two options. Let's make this really simple. Like one where it's like the owner is like deeply ingrained in the business, just grinding it out, but like, maybe is like $1 million larger in revenue, as opposed to option B, which is the seller is out of the day to day for the most part. And like you could step in and generate alpha by, providing better customer service or whatever it was that you wanted, and that's only $1 million lower than the other option in terms of revenue. It's never going to be able to be comparable and say apples to apples, but any buyer is going to be looking for what's the easiest thing for me to either own, from an annuity standpoint or from a growth standpoint. And
hmm
so option B, it would be easier from the annuity standpoint because the owner is not running the day to day for the most part. So there's value in the policies and procedures, the tech stack, other investments that owner has made. But the second
Yeah.
thing is like from a growth standpoint, if that person's already not involved in the day to day, you can bring in some sweat equity into the business and generate, squeeze a little bit more out of that business potentially. So to me, that just has that optionality that I'd be much more interested in. And I think most buyers would, whether sophisticatedly or not, would be interested in. So I think key man risk, trying to get that down as much as possible. Again, going from uncertainty to risk, that transfer is crucial. And
hmm
especially if you can market your business that way to potential buyers, that you've made a lot of that investment in intangibles like correct hiring processes and
Yeah.
efficient tax structures. I think that's just really, really valuable, and it's
hmm
hard to put a value on that. Like you do that kind of when you're doing due diligence, but you kind of get like a gut feeling when you're going through it. Like, okay, there's some training wheels here. Like
Yeah.
I can make some mistakes and it won't burn this whole thing down, as opposed to
hmm
I've got a full-time job on top of trying to be the integrator. I'm also going to be the visionary, or hey, the visionary role is going to have to take a back seat and I'm going to have to just be the integrator for 100% of my bandwidth. That's a
hmm
tough that's a tough task to do unless you really just want to buy a job. So I'm
Yeah.
trying to think of some other, I guess another thing to really think about is like when I think of like, again, the vision, like it seems so amorphous and so like touchy-feely when I think about that as like an investment banker.
hmm
Like what's the value? How do you calculate that? But I think what I think about is like vision is logic, and logic is how a business creates and captures value. And
hmm
I think some people go in with the best intentions of starting a business or buying a business where they want to create value. And then what you end up seeing is they create a bunch of value, they get to a point, and then private equity comes in and they're able to harvest that value out. So there was a lot of money in that business that either could have been redeployed into the business to exponentially grow the business, or for the founder or the owner to be able to take a comfortable or above comfortable living standard. And
hmm
so I say that because logic is the purpose, and you need to have purpose to make sure that the process of the integration and the day to day doesn't go adrift, because you're constantly having urgent tasks that are coming in, and that can kind of warp the vision if you just allow it to. So
Yeah.
having those guardrails in place is going to be really helpful, A, to own and operate, but B, to make that transfer of selling your business. The last
Right.
thing I'll say
Absolutely.
is like Exit planning is an art and a science, and it's something that like I'm learning more and more about of like, I think there's horses for different courses. And like I said before, I'm not a guy that goes from 0 to 1. I'm a guy that goes from 1 to 2. There's going to be someone that can take it from 2 to 3. And if that's in the
Mhm.
best interest for me and my stakeholders, which would be the homeowners, the guests, all the other people that are kind of involved in this, I would
Yeah.
sell. I'd be like, okay, like, everybody's getting something in return. And I think that's the reason why the seller sold to us is that we were able to bring value that maybe she was not willing to be able to do or wasn't able to do. So I think exit planning and understanding what's that takeout number, what does it really look like for your customer base? Like, how are they going to be rewarded for this? Your employee
Mhm.
base as well. But also selfishly, how are you going to be rewarded? Are you going to be okay kind of dealing with like retirement, or maybe it's not enough money to retire, but it's enough to be a little bit more cavalier with your career choices, and just kind
Mhm.
of scenario analysis what that exit is going to look like. And
Yeah.
there's a guy, Greg Maddox, does a really good job of this where he's kind of built a model to kind of give an idea of how much you would need your business to grow every year. So that way it's not as daunting as a task of
Yeah.
like, I need to go from 1 million to 6 million. Like, how
Mhm.
am I supposed to do that? So I have
Mhm.
found there are there's a plethora of people out there that view exit planning and have exit planning services. We definitely say as an owner, you do own it to yourself to kind of get educated on that stuff, because I'll tell you what, your employees are not going to do that for you. You kind of have to do that.
Absolutely. What would you say now, having had second home vacation rentals for a few years now, and what the future of that looks like? What would you say now that you know and have learned in the process that is important to understand in preparation for potential exit, and how soon you're looking into that, or and what not only what that awareness is, but what are some of those important steps, initiatives, focus areas for a business owner to continually be creating value with a potential exit in mind?
So let me just make sure I understand the question. So are you looking for like personal and like tactical takeaways of how to prepare for an exit? Is that is
I mean, I think more so from for the business's standpoint, those intangibles, not only from the financial health, but what things are you focusing on, steps you're taking, and how early in the process in order to position it for value growth.
so I think what helps me is like putting a matrix of like I try to crowdsource from my team, either
Hmm.
informally or formally, like the biggest pain points.
Hmm.
And from because they're gonna have a different advantage than I will. And I like that cognitive diversity of having someone that is gonna A, view something differently because of their experiences, but B, because of their position in the company. Because then it forces me to look at it through their eyes and understand why is this a pain point. Then I try to put that into a matrix where I'm like, okay, what's the return for that solving that sort of pain point?
Mm.
Is this going to be a material return, or is this going to be kind of like, hey, it's a nice to have, but we're going to have to just find some sort of solution to band-aid it, or just kind of muddle our way through it until we have a little bit more resource base to kind of tackle some of these nice to haves, not need to haves. But I think it's important as the visionary or someone that is leading the vision to understand what the prioritization is. And like, I think this ties into what EOS is like EOS is just kind of like a catalyst of or framework to focus the attention
Mm.
of the talent.
Hmm.
And if you're able to understand what is the biggest return for whatever your stakeholders are, whether that's you're like, hey, I'm gung ho on selling my business, so I want to cater to private equity, or I want to cater to a strategic. Cool, you can go and focus on that. If you're like, hey, what's going to drive the most value is to my customers, and then I'll get rewarded for that on the back end anyway to whoever I sell. Cool. But as long as you identify what your initiative is to where that value is going to be created, I think
Hmm.
then you just attack it as aggressively as you can on those major return points. And then you kind of let some of the other smaller stuff go until it either starts to bubble up where it's like, I'm either going to lose a key employee is I'm not
Hmm.
addressing this and we're not aligned anymore. So I need to A, either step it up and address this concern, or B, hey, horses for different courses. This person's no longer a fit and we need to kind of move forward and,
Mm.
find someone that's maybe a better fit for this new role, the role that has transformed into what it is. Does that
Yep.
does that provide some
Yeah, yeah. I think especially with what you said with regard to just having systems and structures to effectively prioritize and knowing what you know about what makes a true ROI within the business helps frame that in that perspective that I think a lot of, is helpful to a lot of business owners is looking at things from an ROI standpoint. What is this going to return? Is this a long-term issue? Is this imperative versus a nice to have? Kind of provides that filter. And I think with regard to the intangibles in the business, when you know those, right? If this is a structural enhancement that's going to return really well for the business because it creates all of these efficiencies or helps us generate revenue and cash flow faster or better, or then that's the lens and the frame you can look to prioritize what deserves energy and what doesn't.
Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
I think the other thing for small businesses to consider too is like alignment is a tricky thing, because a
Hmm.
small business, it's 6 months ago we were a totally different business than we are today. And so
Hmm.
like we have like basically a half-life, like where we're redefining what we are. Our customers are telling us what we should be. Feedback loop is just so much quicker than probably at a much larger organization, just because you've got clear priorities at a larger organization and more resources. But at a smaller organization, you do have to prioritize. So
Hmm.
prioritization can be either in resource allocation, but it also can be in communication to get that alignment and to make sure that people are incentivized, whether that's through financial metrics of like, hey, you get a 7% of
Hmm.
net income, based on, so that way you're making sure that whoever that key person is, they're somewhat aligned with like, we need to be able to scale, not grow, but scale, meaning like top line is increasing, but it's not sacrificing the bottom line. Growth is just, hey, we're just growing the top line. We don't care about the bottom line. You're almost ignoring the bottom line. I think that can work for certain business models, but not for when you're, a linear growth business. So I
Yeah.
like to think of like, I need to be a very active communicator to staff when it needs to occur and not be overly didactic with my team of just wanting to hear myself talk.
Hmm.
But to make sure that there's alignment, and once that alignment starts to get out of whack, just diagnose like what's going on here and
Yep.
understand, can we get the realignment occurring? So that was just something that I heard from you,
Hmm.
parroting back what I was
Yeah.
thinking. So I appreciate you sharing
Makes
that.
sense. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I love how you tie that together. Thank you. Great. So, what advice would you conclude with for entrepreneurs who are struggling to let go and trust their teams more to take on more responsibility without compromising your vision?
I would say that if you're a solopreneur and you don't have someone to spar with in your organization, try to find advisors, whether that's
Mm,
someone like you or kind of an informal network like EO or
hmm.
YPO, but find other individuals, because so much of life is just pattern recognition.
Mm,
And like I used to think like, to be an entrepreneur, like, and I think this is the reason why I prevented becoming an entrepreneur, is because I thought you had to be the next Steve Jobs that has this like crazy heroic,
hmm.
journey to where he got. But I
Right.
found like that's not the case. So you need to find people that have already kind of done this to
Hmm.
understand like, hey, what mistakes am I making that are low value, or reframe, because it's going to give you the energy. And that's if you don't have energy, that's like the greatest resource that an entrepreneur has.
Hmm.
You need to be able to replenish that. So if you're not getting energized from your business, then it's probably time for you to start exploring how to untether yourself from the day to day and explore other avenues, whether that's, hey, I'm going to sell the business on a minority or majority standpoint and do something different with my time, or offer a new service, or I'm going to hit growth, but whatever it is that is intrinsically going to light that fire, you need to start exploring and finding a tribe or other individuals, whether they're
Yeah.
paid or informal. I have found is to be the best course of action to get
Hmm.
out of that status
Hmm.
mode and to try
Yep.
something and risk it. And I
Good
think most
stuff.
people would be surprised. Most people want to have autonomy and have
Yeah.
an influence.
Freedom and
And you do a disservice sometimes if you try to micromanage and over control. And that's usually a sign that you haven't built the proper guardrails in your organization to allow individuals to
right.
try things and make
Yeah.
mistakes.
Absolutely true. Yeah. Well, Joe, if people want to learn more about you or second home vacation rentals,
Yep, that's it. Yep, yep.
that's the website, right?
Yep.
Secondhomevacationrentals.com. And where else can they learn more about you?
Sure. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not really on too much social media, but feel free to reach out to me via email at joe@interopartners.com. That's Interro partners.com. I'm not the greatest at answering emails, but I will try my best. And I get back to everybody, but it just might be a little slow.
Not a problem, to be understood. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here, for your insights, your story. It was great.
And I just want to say, Jill, thank you for your time. You've been a wonderful resource. For anybody that's listening to this, please don't take this as a sales pitch, but Jill has given a lot of her time and insights to me when she didn't have to. And I think that's a sign of a not necessarily a nice person, but a kind person, someone that is willing to listen and make time when it's not necessarily always the most convenient for someone. We're all busy and she takes time. So I just wanted to say,
Mm.
Jill, as a person, I really appreciate everything that you've done. And thank you for having me on. It's been a real honor.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Likewise. It's been great to assist and to help serve. And yeah, I'm excited about what you've built. So here to help.
Appreciate it.
Great. All right. Thanks everyone. Until next time.